So my first encounter with these paintings by Gavin Jantjes was during a visit as part of the research process to the Herbert earlier this year, where we came up to visit the gallery and look at some of the works from the Korabra series. The Korabra series is a series of 7 paintings. Korabra means to go and come back. Gavin Jantjes painted these works when he was in a residency at the West Indian Community Centre here in Coventry. The most well-known of the series, which I believe is number 4, is about a scene from a slave market, which was actually in the other story at the Hayward Gallery in 1989 and has been quite widely reproduced. It's quite well known as part of the series. I, at the time, didn't realise it was part of a wider series. So the first time that I've actually seen any of the works of the series in the flesh was here at the Herbert Gallery when I came to visit as part of the research process for the Black Artists in Modernism project. So these paintings are the first 2 in the series. They're called Untitled, number 1 and number 2. They're the first 2 of 7 paintings. So I think the first thing that I felt when I saw the paintings was their scale, the size, because obviously in the reproduction you don't get a sense of how large they are. The other impression I think I had was the materiality of the paint, the way the thickness, the impasto aspect of the paint, the way that it stands out from the canvas, almost in a kind of sculptural way. Initially I thought about the distance between the subject matter of the paintings, which is the catastrophe of the transatlantic slave trade, the suffering but also hope and struggles of African diaspora slaves in the New World. So it's a really strong, powerful, quite tragic, catastrophic even, story that's being told. But that's not immediately reflected in the imagery. So I felt that there was an interesting décalage, if you like, or gap between, on the one hand, this really emotive, powerful subject of slavery, and I think much of the work that I'd seen particularly by many black artists that had dealt with the question of slavery and the question of transatlantic trade had often dealt with images of shock, with images of black bodies being dismembered or being somehow affected in various ways. And the first thing I felt about this was that there are no black bodies that are literally in the frame. And what you see is a focus on landscape and sky, and the relationship between the land and the sea and the sky. And within that kind of structure, the tragedy is played out in symbolic motives and terms. If we look at the first image where you see stakes coming from the sky being driven into the earth, the stakes sort of represent, in a way, the settlers, the colonialists that are coming into Africa. The land, it represents the land of Africa. The palette is very narrow in terms of blacks, browns, and a brooding blue sky. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner blood red motif, and then in the middle of the image towards the bottom you see kind of an anvil-like figure. Once you start to kind of unravel some of the motifs and the imagery that you see there, it is quite powerful. So the wooden stakes are obviously very sharp. They look almost like teeth or spikes that are falling in an inevitable manner on the earth beneath. So there's a sense of something which is about to happen, and it involves blood, it involves the soil, and it involves a sense of impending doom, if you like. In the second painting, you can see coffin ships with sails, and in the background on the horizon you see a motif in the top left-hand corner which look like pyramids, which refers to kind of Africa or the New World. And on the right-hand side you see Greek columns referring to Europe. So there's a sense in which there's a kind of transporting of the slaves, dead slaves, or at least ships of death from the New World to Europe for use of slave labour. The tragedy of this middle passage, as it's called, the transport of African slaves, is suggested in this image. It's not represented. The motifs that represent Europe and Africa, for example, or Europe and the New World, are symbolic as opposed to representational. Also, I think the direction of travel of the current is quite ambiguous. It's not quite clear whether they're going to Europe or away from Europe. There's a sense of flight, there's a sense of transportation. And of course, Korabra, is a Ghanaian word from the Akan language, which means to go and come back. So it's about this sense of travel, spiritual travel through for the dead and how the dead travel in spirit, but also it hints at the fact that there were live cargoes of human beings that were transported. So these paintings came into the collection at Herbert Gallery in around 1986 on the back of an artistic residency that the artist Gavin Jantjes conducted with the West Indian Community Centre in Spond Street, not far from here in Coventry. The West Indian Community Centre basically opened up a space, a room in the back for Gavin to have a temporary studio, and I think he was given space in a hostel which to live. And the residency lasted for about 6 to 8 weeks, and Gavin came to Coventry, worked in this studio on the condition that the local community would have access. The West Indian Community Centre noted that they would wanted to buy some of the work, but they didn't have the funds, so they asked, there was an agreement with the Herbert to actually buy the work, so they would stay in the West Midlands. And the Herbert Gallery actually bought 2 of the works, which you see in the current display. I think there is a dialogue, certainly, with an aspect of modernism, particularly in the German context, post-war German context, which is about recovery of history and the relevance of history to the present, a suppressed history, a marginal history, a painful history. And that, I think, also speaks to the context of the Herbert collection, which, of course, Coventry was a city devastated by the Second World War, by bombing, and part of the founding or driving motive for the collection of the Herbert Gallery, which was really founded in the late 50s, early 60s, was about addressing the question of reconciliation and reconstruction after tragedy and conflict. I think there was a clear connection between that and some of the motives that Jantjes, the formal motives, and strategies and languages that Jantjes is trying to develop in the Korabra series.